Margaret Ellis stepped through the gates of Grace Valley Correctional Facility, carrying everything she owned in a clear plastic bag. $47 in worn bills. A photograph so faded the faces had become ghosts. A wooden cross she'd worn since she was 16. The chain tarnished black from 2 decades of institutional soap. 20 years reduced to objects that barely had weight. The March air hit different on this side of the razor wire. Colder somehow, sharper, like breathing glass. She was 72 years old. The woman who'd walked into this place at 52 had color in her hair and could carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs without stopping. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone with joints that ached in the morning, hands that trembled for no reason, a heart that skipped beats when she moved too fast. No one waited at the gate. The other women being released had people, daughters, mothers, friends who'd stuck around. Margaret watched them pile into cars, heard their laughter, saw them cry and hug and drive away into lives that had kept spinning without them. She stood alone on the curb with her plastic bag and a bus voucher to Willowbrook. The social worker had given her an address 3 days ago, a halfway house that would let her stay 30 days while she figured out what came next. Margaret had nodded, signed the papers, said nothing about the house on Oakwood Lane, the house her grandmother had built in 1920, the house her mother had left to her in 95, the house Diane had promised to maintain while Margaret served time for a murder she didn't commit. 20 years of silence from her sister. No letters after year 7, no phone calls after year 5. The first 3 years, Diane had written every month. Brief notes about the weather, about keeping the property taxes paid, about how the house was waiting. Then the letter stopped. Then everything stopped. But Margaret had held on to the promise. The oath Diane swore on their mother's grave. When you get out, everything will be there. The Greyhound bus to Willowbrook left at 9:30. Margaret sat in the back, the plastic bag on her lap, and watched Tennessee roll past the window. More strip malls than she remembered. Housing developments where there used to be fields. Fast food chains she'd never heard of. The world had kept changing while she'd been locked in a place where every day was identical to the last. She thought about Thomas. Dead 15 years now, heart attack at 63 while she sat in a cell 200 miles away. They wouldn't let her go to the funeral. Diane was supposed to handle it, the burial, the estate, everything. Margaret had spent 3 days in solitary because she couldn't stop screaming when the chaplain told her. She'd lost her husband and couldn't even say goodbye to his body. They'd tried for children. Spent 10 years trying, actually. Doctors said the problem was hers, something about her uterus, her hormones, medical terms that boiled down to broken. Thomas never blamed her, never even hinted that he minded. The 2 of them had been enough, he'd said. They had the house, they had each other, they had their work. Thomas built furniture in the workshop behind the house. Beautiful pieces carved from local oak and maple, tables and chairs people drove 50 miles to buy. Margaret taught English at Willowbrook High, graded papers at the kitchen table while Thomas sanded wood in the shop. Their lives running parallel and content until September 2006 when Diane showed up crying about gambling debts and dangerous men and a flash drive that would destroy everything. The bus dropped her at the gas station on Main Street at 2:15 in the afternoon. The sun had burned through the morning clouds. Real warmth on her face for the first time in 2 decades. Not the pale, filtered light of the prison yard, but actual sunlight, unobstructed and free. Margaret stood on the sidewalk, breathing it in, feeling the air move through her lungs without anyone watching, without anyone counting how long she stayed outside. The house was 2 miles from town. Her knees weren't what they used to be. The walk took nearly an hour with 2 stops to rest on roadside benches that hadn't existed 20 years ago. But finally she turned onto Oakwood Lane, and finally she saw it. The white farmhouse stood at the end of the gravel drive, exactly where it had always stood. 2 stories with a wraparound porch. 3 acres of land rolling back toward the tree line. The oak tree her grandmother planted in 1925 still stretched its branches over the front yard. Taller now, thicker. Someone had painted the porch. Someone had put flower boxes in the windows. The workshop behind the house still had its roof. Then Margaret saw the minivan in the driveway. Then she saw the plastic slide in the yard. Then she saw the toys scattered across the grass and the woman standing on the porch watching her approach with an expression somewhere between confusion and concern. The woman was young, mid-30s maybe, visibly pregnant, one hand resting on her belly. She wore jeans and a soft blue sweater, and she looked at Margaret in the way you'd look at a lost dog that wandered into your yard. Her voice carried across the distance between them. "Can I help you?" Margaret stopped at the edge of the property. Her heart was doing that thing where it forgot how to beat properly. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the plastic bag with both fists to keep from dropping it. "This is my house." The woman's expression shifted. Confusion deepened into something closer to alarm. "I'm sorry, but we've lived here for 16 years. I think there might be some mistake." 16 years. They'd been in Margaret's house for 16 years. The world tilted sideways. She grabbed the mailbox to stay upright. A mailbox that said Chen in neat black letters, not Ellis, not the name that belonged on this property. "No, there's no mistake. I'm Margaret Ellis. This is my house." The woman went pale. Actually pale, color draining from her face like water from a sink. And Margaret knew. In that instant, she knew that Diane hadn't kept her promise. Diane hadn't maintained anything. Diane had done something worse than abandonment. The woman's hand tightened on her belly. She looked at Margaret for a long moment, then made a decision. "I think you should come inside. I think we need to talk." The kitchen looked nothing like Margaret remembered. Different cabinets, different counters, different appliances humming quietly in the background. But the bones were the same. The window over the sink that looked out toward the oak tree, the doorway that led to what used to be her sewing room, the floor that creaked in the same spot near the refrigerator. The woman put a kettle on to boil, placed a plate of cookies on the table, sat down across from Margaret with her hands folded and her face showing every emotion at once: guilt, horror, sympathy, fear. Her name was Sarah Chen, 34 years old, 7 months pregnant with her third child. She listened while Margaret talked, didn't interrupt once, and by the time Margaret finished explaining about the arrest and the trial and the 20 years and the sister who promised to take care of everything, Sarah was crying. "We bought this house in 2009. My husband and I had just gotten married. We wanted something outside the city, somewhere quiet to raise a family." She stopped, took a breath, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The seller was a woman named Diane Ellis. She said it was her family's property, that her parents had passed away, that her sister had died. She seemed so sad about it, so genuine. She had paperwork, death certificate, probate documents, everything. Our lawyer checked it all. The title was clear. The sale was legal. Margaret felt something twist in her chest, like a knife turning, opening old wounds that had never really healed. "She told you I was dead?" Sarah nodded. Her face had gone from pale to blotchy red. "Oh God, oh my God. We've been living in a stolen house for 16 years. Our children were born here. This is our home and it was never really ours." Margaret reached across the table, took Sarah's hand. The gesture surprised them both. "This isn't your fault. You didn't know. You couldn't have known. My sister fooled everyone. She fooled me for 40 years. You never stood a chance." Sarah looked at her, really looked at her. "What are you going to do? Are you going to, legally, if this house is yours?" Margaret glanced around the kitchen, at the refrigerator covered in children's drawings, at the family photos on the wall showing a man and woman and 2 kids smiling in front of various landmarks, at the evidence of 16 years of life and love and memories built in a space that used to belong to her and Thomas. "I don't know. Honestly, I don't know anything right now. I just got out of prison this morning. I don't have a lawyer. I don't have money. I don't even have a place to sleep tonight." Sarah's expression changed. Something hardened in her eyes. Not against Margaret, against the situation itself, against the injustice of all of it. "You'll stay here tonight. We have a guest room. Tomorrow we're going to figure this out together. I'm not going to." She stopped herself, started again. "What your sister did to you is monstrous, and I don't care what it takes or how long it takes. We're going to make this right." Sarah's husband came home 2 hours later. David Chen, 35 years old, accountant, quiet and methodical in the way of people who solve problems by breaking them into manageable pieces. Sarah explained everything while he stood in the kitchen listening, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he was silent for a long time, just processing, working through the implications like a spreadsheet only he could see. The paperwork was forged, the death certificate, the probate documents, all of it. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make this sale look legitimate. Margaret's voice came out hoarse. My sister, Diane. She worked as a bookkeeper. She knew how to manipulate financial records. She must have known how to forge legal documents too. David nodded slowly. We need to see those original documents, the ones from our purchase, and we need to find out exactly what happened to your assets, the house, your savings, everything. There was money. Margaret's hands were shaking again. $180,000 in a safe in the basement. My life savings. Diane knew where it was. She knew the combination. She was supposed to use it to pay the property taxes while I was gone. Sarah and David exchanged a look. The kind of look married people develop after years together, entire conversations happening in the space of a glance. There's a no safe in the basement. Sarah's voice was quiet. We've been down there 100 times. Storage and the furnace, that's all. Margaret already knew. Some part of her had known the moment she saw strangers living in her house. But hearing it confirmed still hurt, still felt like being stabbed all over again. She took it all, 20 years. She took 20 years of my life, and then she took everything else too. That night, Margaret slept in the guest room of her own house. The room that used to be where she sewed curtains and quilts and Halloween costumes for neighbors' children. Now it had pale blue walls and a queen-size bed and framed photos of the Chen family's vacations to places Margaret had never been. She lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything, trying to answer the question that kept circling in her mind like a vulture. Why? Why would Diane do this? What had Margaret ever done to deserve this kind of betrayal? They'd been sisters. They'd been close. Margaret had protected Diane their whole lives, bailed her out of trouble, lent her money, let her cry on her shoulder through 2 divorces and countless bad decisions. And in return, Diane had framed her for murder, stolen her house, taken her savings, told everyone she was dead. Why? Margaret didn't have an answer, wasn't sure she ever would. But as the sun started to rise over the Tennessee hills, painting the guest room in shades of gold and pink, she made a decision. She was going to find out. The sound of small feet running woke her just after 7. Margaret sat up disoriented, thinking for a confused moment she was back in her cell. Then she remembered. The house, the Chens, the guest room with the pale blue walls. The door burst open. A little girl stood in the doorway. 8 years old maybe, blonde hair and pigtails, bright eyes full of curiosity. She stared at Margaret for a long moment before speaking. Who are you? Sarah appeared behind her daughter, slightly out of breath. Lily, honey, I told you to let Mrs. Ellis sleep. The little girl, Lily, didn't move, just kept staring at Margaret with that unfiltered childhood directness that cuts through every social pretense. You're sleeping in the guest room. Why didn't you sleep in a bedroom? Margaret found herself smiling for the first time in longer than she could remember. Your room is nicer, sweetheart. Lily came closer, climbed up onto the edge of the bed without asking permission. Mom was crying last night. I heard. Did you make her sad? No, baby. The situation made her sad, not me. What situation? Sarah put a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Lily, let Mrs. Ellis get dressed. We'll explain downstairs. But Lily was already looking at Margaret with an expression Margaret recognized from 20 years of teaching teenagers. The look of someone who'd decided something important and wasn't going to be dissuaded. Are you going to stay? You look like you need a friend. Margaret's heart cracked, just a little, just enough to let in the first ray of light in 2 decades. The next few weeks moved in a blur of phone calls and paperwork and discoveries. David Chen turned out to be exactly the kind of person you wanted in your corner when you're trying to untangle 2 decades of fraud. Methodical, patient, absolutely relentless. He connected Margaret with Emily Patterson, a young lawyer 3 years out of law school, who worked pro bono for people who'd been failed by the system. Emily took one look at Margaret's case and said 4 words that changed everything. I believe you. I'm in. Emily brought in an investigator, Michael, David's colleague from the accounting firm who specialized in forensic analysis. Between the two of them, they started pulling threads Margaret didn't even know existed. A week after Margaret's release, David spread documents across the kitchen table. Margaret sat down to look and immediately wished she hadn't. She didn't just sell the house, she liquidated everything. He pointed to receipts, bank transfers, a detailed accounting of everything Margaret had ever owned converted to cash and deposited into an account under Diane's name. Your husband's workshop equipment, sold to an antique dealer in Nashville for $12,000. Your furniture, sold at an estate sale in 2008. Your mother's china, your family photographs, your clothes, everything. She even sold your car. Margaret stared at the documents. Sale receipts, bank transfers, a detailed accounting of her entire life broken down into line items and dollar amounts. How much? Her voice came out hollow. Total. How much did she take? David hesitated. The house sold for $215,000. The contents brought in another $38,000. Combined with the cash you said was in the safe, $180,000. That's $433,000, give or take. $433,000. Her entire life. Everything she and Thomas had built together. Everything her parents and grandparents had left her. Gone. All of it. Stolen by the sister she would have died for. Where did it go? The money. Where did she put it? That's where it gets complicated. The account was closed in 2010. The funds were transferred to a bank in Arizona. After that, the trail goes cold. Margaret filed that information away. Arizona, a direction, a place to start looking. David pulled out another document. His face had gone from uncomfortable to actively pained. There's something else. I found the police reports from your case. The original investigation. The man who was killed, Victor Blackwood. He paused, met Margaret's eyes. He wasn't just some random businessman. He was Diane's boyfriend. They'd been seeing each other for almost a year before his death. The room went silent. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. What? According to the police reports, they were having an affair. Blackwood was married, but he and Diane were planning to run away together. He was going to leave his wife, liquidate his assets, start over with Diane in another state, but Diane testified against me. She said I was the one who wanted Blackwood dead. She said I had a grudge against him. She lied. David's voice was flat, hard. She lied about everything. And I think I know why. He pulled out one more document, a life insurance policy. Victor Blackwood had a $2 million life insurance policy. His wife was the primary beneficiary, but there was a secondary beneficiary listed, someone who would receive the payout if the wife was also deceased or if she was convicted of involvement in his death. Margaret's hands were shaking. Who? A woman named Diana Wilson. Except Diana Wilson didn't exist before 2005. She was a fabricated identity. He met Margaret's eyes. The Social Security number associated with Diana Wilson was issued to Diane Marie Ellis in 1972. The room spun. Margaret grabbed the edge of the table. Diane killed him. She killed Victor Blackwood, framed me for it, and collected $2 million in insurance money. That's what the evidence suggests. Yes, $2 million plus the $400,000 she'd stolen from Margaret. $2.4 million plus whatever else she'd accumulated in the 16 years since. Diane hadn't just betrayed her sister. She'd executed a perfect crime, got away with murder, literally, and built a new life on the wreckage of everyone she'd destroyed. And Margaret had spent 20 years in prison paying for it. Emily Patterson called the next morning. David had sent her everything overnight. She'd read it 3 times and then called at 6 a.m. because she couldn't wait. This case is a disaster. The original investigation was sloppy at best, corrupt at worst. They had a suspect who fit their narrative, and they stopped looking. They never investigated Diane's relationship with Blackwood. They never questioned the forged documents. They never even verified that the so-called gambling debts existed. Can you prove I'm innocent? Emily hesitated. Proving innocence after 20 years is complicated. Evidence disappears. Witnesses die or forget. But what I can do is prove that your conviction was based on fraudulent evidence and perjured testimony. I can prove that Diane manufactured the entire case against you. And then what? Then we petition for exoneration. We get your record cleared, and we build a civil case against Diane for fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Emily's voice changed, became harder, more certain. Margaret, what your sister did to you isn't just betrayal. It's a crime. Multiple crimes, and I'm going to make sure she answers for every single one of them. For the first time in 20 years, Margaret felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. But she needed more than hope. She needed to understand. She needed to look Diane in the eyes and ask the question that had haunted her for 2 decades. Why? David's colleague found Diane 2 weeks later, or rather found the trail of names she'd used since 2006. Diana Wilson, Diane Mitchell, Diana Wells, and most recently, Diana Hartley. She moved every few years, changed her name, her appearance, her history. Someone very good at disappearing. Currently, she was in Paradise Valley, Arizona. Gated community, very exclusive. Married to a man named Richard Hartley, retired surgeon, widower, net worth around $8 million. Of course, Diane had found another mark, another victim, another person to manipulate and eventually destroy. The investigator handed over one more piece of information. Diana Hartley was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer 8 months ago. She was undergoing treatment, but the prognosis wasn't good. Doctors were saying 6 months to a year, maybe less. Margaret didn't know how to feel about that. Part of her wanted to feel satisfied, karmic justice, divine retribution, whatever you wanted to call it. But mostly she just felt tired. Diane was dying. The sister who had stolen everything, freedom, home, savings, her husband's final years, was dying. And Margaret still had questions. Questions that only Diane could answer. She looked at Emily, at David, at Sarah, who had come to every meeting, who had supported her through every revelation. I need to see her. I need to talk to Diane face to face. Emily frowned. Margaret, I don't think that's a good idea. If she knows we're on to her, she could destroy evidence. Flee the country. Anything. She's dying. She's not going anywhere. Margaret's voice was steady now. Certain. I didn't spend 20 years in prison to get answers from a courtroom. I need to hear it from her. I need to look her in the eye and ask her why. David stood in the doorway of his workshop behind the house. Not Thomas's workshop. That building belonged to the Chens now, had belonged to them for 16 years. But David had converted it into his own space. A place to think, to work with his hands when numbers stopped making sense. Margaret, there's someone you should meet, someone who knew Thomas. The man who walked through the door was 68 years old with carpenter's hands and eyes that had seen too much grief. He looked at Margaret and his face crumpled. Margaret, God, Thomas told me you'd come back. He always said you'd come back. She didn't recognize him at first. Then the pieces clicked into place. The age, the build, the way he stood like a man who'd spent his life working with wood. Frank Morrison, Thomas's best friend, the man who taught Thomas everything he knew about carpentry. Frank crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled her into a hug. She felt his shoulders shake, felt tears soak into her shirt. Welcome home, Margaret. Welcome home. He pulled back, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I've been paying the property taxes. 20 years. From money Thomas left me. He knew Diane was dangerous. He told me if anything happened, I had to keep the house safe for you. You paid the taxes? $5,000 a year for 20 years. Thomas left me $10,000 in his will. I used that first. Then I used my own money. He was my brother, Margaret. Not by blood, but by choice. This was the least I could do for him. Margaret couldn't speak, could barely breathe. This man, this near stranger, had spent $100,000 of his own money over 2 decades to protect property that wasn't his. Because Thomas had asked him to. Because that's what family did. Lily Chen appeared in the doorway. She'd taken to following Margaret around whenever she visited, which was daily now. The little girl had decided Margaret was hers to protect and wouldn't be dissuaded. Mr. Frank, can I see the workshop? The one my dad keeps talking about? Frank looked at Margaret. She nodded. The building behind the house had been Thomas's sanctuary. Margaret hadn't been inside since the day before her arrest. Frank had maintained it exactly as Thomas left it. Tools on the walls, sawdust on the floor, the smell of wood and varnish, and decades of careful work. Lily ran her hands over everything, asked questions about every tool, every piece of equipment. Frank answered patiently, explaining the function of each item like he was passing down sacred knowledge. Then Lily saw it. The table. What's that? Margaret's breath caught. She'd forgotten. Thomas had been working on a table the week before her arrest, a dining table commissioned by someone in Nashville. Large piece, oak, intricate carving work. Except this wasn't the commissioned table. This was smaller, more delicate, and the carving along the edge wasn't generic scrollwork. It was roses, Margaret's favorite flower. Frank's voice was soft. That's the table Thomas was making for your grandmother. He started it 2 weeks before he died, never got to finish it. The wood was still beautiful after all these years, still showed the marks of Thomas's careful hands. Lily leaned in close to examine the carving. Her finger traced letters cut into the underside of the tabletop. What does this say? Margaret knelt down. Read the words Thomas had carved 20 years ago in letters meant only for her eyes. For Margaret, my heart. She touched the wood, felt tears she'd been holding for 2 decades finally break free. Lily looked at Frank. Can you finish it? Can you make it like Mr. Thomas wanted? Frank met Margaret's eyes, asked a question without words. She nodded. Yeah, sweetheart, I think I can do that. That evening, Lily insisted Margaret come over for dinner. The little girl had made place cards, hand-drawn with crayons, and put Margaret's between her own seat and Sarah's. Like Margaret was already part of the family. Like there was no question about where she belonged. After dinner, Lily wanted to play hide and seek. Sarah tried to tell her no, that Mrs. Ellis was tired, but Margaret surprised herself by saying yes. The game started simple enough. Lily counted while Margaret and the other kids hid. But Lily was smart, strategic. She checked all the obvious places first. Behind the couch, under the dining table, in the coat closet by the front door. Then she went upstairs. Margaret was in the living room when she heard it. A knocking sound. Hollow. Different from the normal sounds of a child moving through a house. Lily's voice carried down the stairs. Mom, there's something weird in your closet. Sarah and David exchanged a look, headed upstairs. Margaret followed, her heart doing that thing again where it forgot how to beat properly. The master bedroom closet was spacious. Walk in. Lily stood inside, pointing at the back wall. It sounds different here, listen. She knocked on the wall, then knocked on the wall beside it. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. One was solid, the other rang hollow. David pushed on the panel. Nothing happened. He ran his hands along the edges, looking for a seam, a catch, anything. Frank appeared in the doorway. He'd stayed for dinner at Lily's insistence. Now he pushed past everyone and examined the wall with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 50 years working with wood. This is Thomas's work. I'd recognize his joinery anywhere. He pressed a spot near the top corner. Something clicked. The panel swung inward, revealing a space roughly 2 feet by 3 feet carved into the wall itself. Inside were boxes, a wooden case with a lock, notebooks, envelopes. Margaret's hands were shaking so badly she could barely reach for the nearest notebook. She opened it and saw Thomas's handwriting. Dated entries, a journal. Frank reached for the wooden case, turned it over, found the words carved into the lid. For Margaret, from T. Lily looked up at Margaret with eyes full of wonder. Mr. Thomas left you a treasure. Not a treasure, sweetheart. Something better. The truth. Frank's fingers worked the lock mechanism with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how Thomas thought. 3 turns left, 2 right, 1 left again. The wooden case opened. Inside lay a key. Brass, old-fashioned. The kind that opened safes built before electronics replaced metal tumblers. Beneath it, a letter in Thomas's handwriting. The envelope yellowed with age, sealed with wax that had cracked but still held. Margaret's chest tightened. Thomas had known. Somehow her husband had known what was coming and left her a way back. The letter trembled in her hands as she broke the seal. Margaret, my love, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Or worse has happened. I've been watching Diane for 6 months. She's meeting a man named Victor Blackwood, married, wealthy. They're planning something. She asked me about your life insurance last week, about the house value, about what would happen to our assets if you died. I lied, told her we have nothing worth taking, but but I was wrong. We have everything, and I've hidden it where only you can find it. The key opens the safe Frank is keeping for you. Inside, our savings, your mother's jewelry, the house documents proving your inheritance, and evidence about Diane I pray you never need. If something happens to me, or to you, don't trust her. Don't believe her tears. Our mother knew. She warned me before she died. The letter is in the safe. Diane has always been jealous. I didn't want to believe it could go this far. I was wrong. Live, Margaret. Even if I'm not there, find happiness. You deserve it more than anyone I've ever known. Forever yours, Thomas. David was already moving. Where's this safe? Where does Frank keep it? Frank's face had gone gray. My house. Thomas brought it to me in August 2006. Month before Margaret got arrested. He said if anything happened, I was to give it to her when she got out. Nobody else. Just her. They drove to Frank's house in 2 cars. Lily insisted on riding with Margaret and Frank, her small hand gripping Margaret's the entire 10-minute drive. The little girl had stopped asking questions, just held on like she understood that sometimes the only thing you can do for someone is stay close. Frank's house was a modest ranch on the edge of Willowbrook, the kind of place a retired carpenter lives when he spent more money on his tools than his mortgage. He led them to the bedroom closet, pushed aside hanging shirts to reveal a small safe built into the wall. Thomas installed this for me 30 years ago, after my house got broken into. He said the best protection is something nobody knows exists. The brass key slid into the lock like it had been waiting 20 years for this exact moment. Frank turned it, the door swung open. Inside, stacks of $100 bills bound with paper bands. Margaret's mother's jewelry box, mahogany with brass hinges, a leather folder containing documents, and a USB drive in a plastic case labeled in Thomas's handwriting, evidence, Diane and Victor. David reached for the cash first, started counting. His accountant's hands moved through the bills with practiced efficiency. 180,000. Exactly what you said was in the basement safe. Thomas moved it 2 weeks before he died. He knew Diane had the combination to the safe in the house. He knew she'd take it the first chance she got. Sarah picked up the jewelry box, opened it carefully. Inside, pearl necklaces and gold bracelets and the diamond ring Margaret's grandmother had worn every day of her adult life. Pieces Margaret thought she'd never see again. The leather folder held the original deed to the house, dated 1920, 4 generations of transfers, each one properly notarized and recorded. Margaret's name on the final line, transferred from her mother's estate in '95. Legal proof that the house belonged to her, that it had always belonged to her. David was already opening his laptop. He plugged in the USB drive, waited for the files to load, then went very still. These are emails between Diane and Victor Blackwood, going back to 2005. How far back? 18 months before his death. Margaret moved to stand behind David, right over his shoulder. The email started casual, flirtatious, then became explicit, then shifted into something darker. Planning, scheming, talking about Victor's wife, about his life insurance policy, about how to make sure the money went to the right person. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. They were going to kill him from the beginning. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was premeditated murder. Keep reading. David scrolled down. There, look at the date, March 2006. The email was from Diane to Victor. Your wife is too careful. She's never alone. We need a backup plan. What about my sister? She's trusting, naive. If something goes wrong with plan A, we can make her the scapegoat. She'll believe anything I tell her. Victor's response came 2 hours later. Your sister the teacher? How do we frame her? Diane's reply was clinical, detached, the kind of message you write when you're discussing business, not destroying someone's life. Easy. I have power of attorney over her finances, access to her handwriting samples. She trusts me completely. If we need her to take the fall, I can build a case that would convince anyone. I've been studying how to do it. It's not that hard if you know what evidence the police look for. Lily had come to stand next to Margaret. The little girl was reading the emails too. Her face had gone serious in the way children's faces do when they realize the world is uglier than they thought. She planned to hurt you from the start, before anything bad even happened. She was already thinking about how to blame you. Margaret's hand found Lily's shoulder. Some people make choices that destroy them from the inside. Your job is to never become that kind of person. David scrolled further, found emails from July 2006, 1 month before Victor's death. Victor was pulling out, getting cold feet. His wife had hired a private investigator. He couldn't risk the divorce anymore. Told Diane it was over. Diane's response came fast. We're not done. I've put too much into this. If you back out now, I'll make sure your wife knows everything, every email, every hotel room, every lie you told her. You'll lose her anyway and get nothing. Victor's reply was desperate. What do you want from me? Diane's answer arrived 6 hours later. Everything, and since you won't give it willingly, I'll take it another way. Your life insurance pays double for accidental death, triple for murder if the killer is caught. I know someone who can make it look right. You're worth more to me dead than alive, Victor. I'm sorry it has to be this way. The room had gone silent. Even Lily had stopped moving. Sarah was crying quietly. Frank looked like he might be sick, she told him. Margaret's voice sounded strange even to her own ears. Diane literally told Victor she was going to have him killed, and he couldn't do anything about it because she had evidence of their affair. He was trapped. David closed the laptop. We need to give this to Emily tonight. This is enough to reopen your case, to prove Diane manufactured everything. It's not enough to prove I'm innocent, just that she's guilty. Frank put a hand on Margaret's arm. Sometimes those are the same thing, Margaret. Sometimes the only way to prove you didn't do something is to prove who really did. Emily arrived within an hour. She'd been at home reviewing other cases when David called. She walked through Frank's door, saw the cash and jewelry and documents spread across the kitchen table, and her eyes went wide. This is a prosecutor's dream. Everything documented, everything dated. A clear timeline of conspiracy and premeditation. She picked up the USB drive, turned it over in her hands like it was something holy. With this, I can file for exoneration. I can petition to have your conviction vacated. And I can bring charges against Diane for first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud, perjury, and about 15 other felonies. How long? Emily hesitated. Normally these things take years, but with evidence this strong and a recorded confession. Wait, Margaret interrupted. What recorded confession? Emily smiled. It was a sharp smile, the smile of someone who knew exactly how to win. The confession we're going to get when you confront Diane in Arizona. Tennessee is a one-party consent state. If you're present during a conversation, you can legally record it without the other person's knowledge. And dying people sometimes want to confess, clear their conscience before the end. You want me to trick my sister into admitting everything on tape. I want you to have a conversation with her, to ask her the questions you need answered. If she chooses to tell the truth, that's her decision. We're just going to make sure there's a record of it. David was already looking up flights. Phoenix Sky Harbor, nonstop from Nashville. 3 hours, 47 minutes. My wife is 7 months pregnant. I can't leave her right now. Emily didn't hesitate. I'll go with Margaret. We'll get what we need and be back in 48 hours. Lily crossed her arms. I want to go too. Sarah knelt down to her daughter's eye level. No, baby. You stay here with Dad and help take care of things at home. But Lily was looking at Margaret. Her 8-year-old face was set with determination that looked eerily adult. You have to promise to come back. You have to promise you won't stay there. Margaret knelt down too, met the little girl at eye level. I promise, sweetheart. I always come back, even when it takes 20 years. The next 3 days blurred together. Emily filing preliminary motions with the Tennessee court system. David organizing all the evidence into a presentation that would convince any reasonable judge. Sarah helping Margaret pick out clothes for the trip, the first new clothes Margaret had owned in 2 decades. Frank spent those 3 days in the workshop behind the Chen house, working on Thomas's table, sanding the wood that had sat untouched for 20 years, finishing the carving Thomas had started, completing something her husband had meant as a gift but never got to give. On the 3rd evening, Frank brought the table inside. The wood glowed with new polish. The roses carved along the edge looked like they might bloom. The inscription on the underside now read, "For Margaret, my heart, TC 2006." completed by FM 247. They placed it in the center of the dining room, right where everyone would see it when they walked in, right where it would remind them that love doesn't end just because someone dies, that some promises get kept even when it takes decades. Lily ran her hands over the smooth surface. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Your grandmother is right. Frank's voice was rough with emotion. Thomas would be so proud of this table, of Margaret, of everything you've all done to help her. Sarah set the table for dinner that night, used her best dishes, put candles in the center, made it a celebration even though everyone knew what was coming. Margaret was leaving for Arizona in the morning, going to face the sister who'd destroyed her life, coming back with evidence or coming back with nothing. They ate slowly, talked about small things. Lily told jokes she'd learned at school. David explained a spreadsheet formula that made everyone's eyes glaze over. Sarah described the baby's movements, how the third pregnancy felt different from the first two. Normal conversation, normal moments. The kind of evening Margaret hadn't experienced in 20 years. Being part of a family, being included in the mundane rhythms of daily life. After dinner, Lily presented Margaret with a card she'd made, construction paper folded in half, crayon drawings on the front showing a stick figure, Margaret with a crown. Inside, in careful second-grade handwriting, "Good luck. Come home soon. Love, Lily." Margaret tucked it into her purse, kept it close, a talisman from a child who believed in her. The flight left at 6:30 in the morning. Emily picked Margaret up at 5. They drove to Nashville in darkness, watching the sun rise over Tennessee as they pulled into the airport. Margaret had never been on a plane, never had a reason to go anywhere far enough that driving wouldn't work. Now she was about to fly 2,000 miles to confront the person who'd stolen everything she'd ever loved. The security checkpoint confused her. All the rules about shoes and liquids and electronics. Emily guided her through it patiently, helped her figure out which bins to use, explained why she had to throw away the bottle of water she'd brought from home. The gate was crowded, families traveling together, business people working on laptops, everyone moving through the airport like they did this every day, like flying across the country was nothing special. Emily bought them coffee, found seats near the window, pulled out her tablet and reviewed notes she'd been making all week. We need her to talk about the murder, about framing you, about the money. If she admits to any of those things on tape, we have grounds to reopen everything. What if she doesn't? What if she just refuses to talk? Then we use what we already have. The emails, the USB drive, Jake Morrison's testimony. Who's Jake Morrison? Emily looked up from her tablet. The investigator found him. He's the man Diane hired to kill Victor. He's in prison in Indiana for an unrelated crime. But when our investigators showed him the emails, showed him proof that Diane was the one who orchestrated everything, he agreed to testify. In exchange for consideration on his sentence, he's willing to admit he killed someone. He's willing to admit Diane paid him $8,000 to make Victor Blackwood's death look like a home invasion gone wrong. That she gave him the security codes to Blackwood's house. That she told him exactly when to strike. And that she promised she'd frame someone else if anything went wrong. Margaret processed that, tried to reconcile the image of her little sister, the girl she'd protected through childhood, the woman she'd helped through divorces and bad decisions, with someone who could hire a killer, who could plan a murder with the same efficiency most people use to plan a vacation. They called for boarding. Margaret followed Emily onto the plane, found her seat by the window, buckled in with hands that still shook. The engines roared, the plane rolled down the runway, and then they were lifting, rising, leaving Tennessee behind and climbing into clouds that looked like nothing Margaret had ever seen from the ground. Emily worked on her laptop the whole flight, reviewing case law, drafting motions, preparing for every possible scenario. Margaret just watched the country pass below, watched green Tennessee give way to brown Texas, give way to red desert that could only be Arizona. 3 hours and 47 minutes after leaving Nashville, they landed in Phoenix. The heat hit like a wall when they stepped outside, dry and relentless. Nothing like the humid Tennessee summers Margaret remembered from before prison. This was heat that sucked moisture from your lungs. That made you understand why people called this place inhospitable. They rented a car. Emily drove. She'd been to Phoenix before for a law school conference, knew the basic layout, navigated them toward Paradise Valley with the confidence of someone who'd studied the route. The city looked like something from a science fiction movie, all glass and steel and landscaping that shouldn't survive in a desert. Palm trees planted in neat rows, grass so green it had to be artificial, swimming pools behind every wall, an entire metropolis built on denial of the landscape's reality. Paradise Valley sat on the edge of Phoenix like a crown on a throne. Gated communities, private security, houses that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Money insulating itself from everything unpleasant. Sunset Ridge Estates had the kind of gate that looked decorative but could probably stop a tank. The guard checked Emily's license, asked who they were visiting. Diana Hartley. She's expecting us. Emily's voice was smooth, professional. She'd called ahead pretending to be from a charity that Diana had supposedly donated to. Got confirmation that Mrs. Hartley was home. Got the gate code by claiming they needed it to deliver a thank you gift. The guard made a call, waited, nodded, waved them through. The houses inside were massive, single-story sprawl that went on forever. Red tile roofs and stucco walls and courtyards with fountains, each one trying to outdo the next in displays of wealth. Diane's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, the largest one on the street, a fountain in the front yard with actual water running through it despite the desert, palm trees lining the circular driveway. Everything perfect, everything expensive, everything built on blood and lies. Emily parked the car, turned to Margaret. "Are you ready?" Margaret looked at the house, at the life her sister had built on the ruins of hers, at the physical manifestation of 20 years of theft and betrayal. "No, but I'm going anyway." They walked to the front door together. Emily had a small recording device in her purse. Activated. Legal in Tennessee for any conversation where one party consents to being recorded. Margaret was that consenting party. Emily rang the doorbell. They heard movement inside. Slow footsteps, the shuffle of someone who was sick, dying. The door opened. Diane stood there. 70 years old now, 20 years since Margaret had seen her. The cancer had ravaged what age hadn't already taken. She was skeletal, barely 100 pounds. Her hair was gone, chemotherapy probably. She wore a silk scarf wrapped around her head, designer clothes that hung loose on her frame, eyes sunken deep in their sockets but still sharp, still calculating. She looked at Margaret, 1 second of incomprehension, then recognition, then something that might have been fear but looked more like resignation. Her voice came out raspy, damaged from the cancer or the treatment or both. "Maggie, I've been waiting for you to find me." The name hit like a punch. Nobody had called Margaret that in 20 years. It had been Thomas's name for her, their private language. And Diane had used it too, back when they were sisters, back before everything fell apart. Margaret's throat was tight. Her hands were clenched into fists. 20 years of questions threatening to pour out all at once. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm, to remember why she was here. "We need to talk." Diane smiled. It was a terrible smile. Empty, like looking into a mirror and seeing nothing reflected back. "Yes, I suppose we do." She stepped aside, gestured them into a house that looked like a museum, all white and cream and gray. No photos on the walls, no personal touches, just expensive furniture arranged in expensive rooms that nobody really lived in. Diane led them to a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking a pool, in a garden that must have cost a fortune to maintain in the desert. She lowered herself into a chair slowly, every movement causing pain. "Can I get you anything? Water? Tea?" Margaret remained standing, Emily beside her, both of them watching Diane like you'd watch a snake. "We didn't come for tea." "No," Diane's fingers traced the arm of her chair. "I imagine you came for answers, after all this time. After everything you did." Diane's eyes flickered, something that might have been amusement. "What I did?" "Yes, that's one way to frame it." She gestured to the other chairs. "At least sit. This is going to take a while." Emily touched Margaret's arm, a gentle pressure, a reminder. They needed Diane talking, needed her comfortable, needed her to confess. Margaret sat, kept her spine straight. kept her eyes on her sister. 20 years. You let me rot in prison for 20 years. Diane didn't flinch, didn't look away. You were supposed to be out in 10 with good behavior. I didn't expect you to serve the full sentence. But yes, 20 years. I'm aware of how long it's been. The casual tone ignited something in Margaret's chest. Rage that had been burning low for 2 decades suddenly flaring hot. You framed me for murder. You stole my house. You took everything I had. You told people I was dead. And you're sitting there like we're discussing the weather. What do you want me to say, Maggie? That I'm sorry? That I regret what I did? Diane's voice had gone flat, emotionless. I don't. I did what I had to do. You were just collateral damage. Collateral damage. 20 years. Thomas dying alone. Everything stolen. Her entire life erased. Collateral damage. The question tore out of Margaret like something physical. Diane looked at her for a long moment. Then she laughed, a dry, bitter sound that turned into a cough. She pressed a hand to her chest, waited for the coughing to subside. Why, oh Maggie, after all these years, you still don't understand? Then explain it to me. That's why I'm here. I need to understand. Diane's eyes drifted to the window, to the pool and the garden and the desert beyond. You want to know why I destroyed your life? Fine. I'll tell you, but you're not going to like it. She shifted in her chair. Winced with pain. You were always Mother's favorite. Did you know that? Of course you did. Everyone knew it. Perfect Margaret. Responsible Margaret. Margaret who got straight A's and never broke the rules and always did exactly what she was supposed to do. That's not... Don't interrupt me. You wanted the truth. Here it is. Diane's voice had gained strength. Venom. Mother loved you, really loved you. The way a mother is supposed to love a daughter. But me, I was the problem child, the difficult one, always getting into trouble, always needing to be bailed out, always disappointing everyone. Mother loved you too. No, she didn't. She tolerated me. She was embarrassed by me. And when she died, she made sure everyone knew exactly where I stood in this family. What are you talking about? The inheritance, Maggie. Don't pretend you don't remember. Margaret shook her head. You got the life insurance. I got the house. That's what Mother wanted. Diane's laugh was sharp. Do you have any idea how much that life insurance was worth? $23,000, Margaret. That's what I got. $23,000. While you got a house worth $200,000 plus 3 acres of land plus everything inside it. Mother's china, grandmother's jewelry, daddy's tools, everything. I didn't know the amounts. I never thought about it that way. Of course you didn't. Because you were the favorited. You got everything handed to you and I got the scraps. Margaret leaned forward. That doesn't justify what you did. That doesn't explain framing me for murder. Diane's eyes were cold now. Hard. Victor was my way out. He was rich, successful, willing to leave his wife for me. We had plans, real plans. He was going to divorce her, liquidate his assets. We were going to start over somewhere new together. Emily spoke for the first time since entering the house. But something went wrong. Diane glanced at her, seemed to notice her for the first time. His wife found out about us, threatened to take him for everything in the divorce. Victor panicked, said he couldn't leave her after all. Too risky, too expensive. He was going to abandon me just like everyone else. So you killed him. Diane's voice didn't change. I did what I had to do. Victor had a life insurance policy. $2 million. I knew about the secondary beneficiary clause because I'd helped him set it up. All I had to do was make sure his wife couldn't collect. By framing her for his murder. That was the original plan, but she had an alibi. She was at a charity gala the night Victor died. Hundreds of witnesses. I needed another scapegoat, someone without an alibi, someone the police would believe could do something like this. Me. You. Diane met Margaret's eyes without flinching. I knew you'd come running if I showed up crying. You always did, and I knew you'd do anything to protect me. So I gave you the flash drive, let you think you were helping. Then I tipped off the police about where to look. The handwriting on those documents. You forged it. I spent months practicing your handwriting. You used to send me birthday cards, Christmas cards. Letters when I was going through my divorces. I had plenty of samples to work from. The money from my bank account. I had power of attorney. You signed it years ago. Remember when Thomas had his first heart attack? You wanted someone to be able to access your accounts if something happened to you. Margaret remembered signing those papers, remembered trusting Diane completely, remembered thinking she was being responsible, preparing for emergencies. You used every bit of that trust against me. Diane shrugged. It was surprisingly easy. You made it easy, Maggie. You believed everything I told you. Never questioned, never doubted. Just trusted your baby sister completely. 20 years. You let me go to prison for 20 years. I expected you to be out in 10. Good behavior. Overcrowding. I thought you'd do half the sentence, maybe less. That makes it better? That you only meant to steal 10 years instead of 20? Diane's expression didn't change. I took what should have been mine from the beginning. The house, the money, the life Mother should have left me. You had everything, Maggie. The house, Thomas. The career, the respect. You had everything I ever wanted, so you took it. I took what I deserved. Margaret stared at her sister, at this dying woman who felt no remorse for destroying her life, who sat in a stolen palace built on blood and justified it all with childhood jealousy. You're a monster. Diane's smile was ice. Call it whatever you want. I got what I deserved. You got what you had coming. We're even now. We're not even close to even. Emily's hand touched Margaret's arm. A warning. A reminder. They had what they came for. Diane had confessed, on tape, everything they needed. But Margaret had one more question. The house, you told people I was dead. You sold my home. Diane didn't hesitate. It should have been mine from the start. Mother was wrong to give it to you. I corrected her mistake. Forged the death certificate, probate documents, everything. It wasn't that hard for someone who knows bookkeeping. You sold it for $215,000 upon, and your furniture for $38,000, and your mother's jewelry, and Thomas's equipment, all of it, $433,000. Everything I owned, plus the $2 million from Victor's insurance. Diane's voice was matter of fact. I've done well for myself. This house, my husband, the life I have now, all of it built on being smart enough to take what I needed. Built on murder and theft and destroying your own sister. Diane's eyes narrowed. You sound so righteous, so above it all, but you're here, in my house, trying to what? Get revenge? Make me confess? It's too late, Maggie. I'm dying, 6 months at most. Whatever you think you're going to do to me, the cancer is doing worse. Margaret stood. Emily stood with her. We have what we need. Diane's face changed, the smug confidence cracking just slightly. What are you talking about? Emily pulled the recording device from her purse, held it up. Tennessee is a one-party consent state. Margaret consented to recording this conversation. Everything you just said about Victor's murder, about framing Margaret, about the fraud and the forgery, all of it recorded, all of it admissible in court. Diane's face went white. You can't. That's legal. Completely legal. Emily's voice was hard now, professional. Diane Marie Carter, also known as Diana Wilson, Diana Hartley, you just confessed to first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud, perjury, and approximately 15 other felonies. I'm submitting this recording to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and the Arizona Attorney General's office. Whatever time you have left, I suggest you spend it with a very good lawyer. Diane tried to stand, failed, gripped the arms of her chair. You can't prove any of this. It's my word against yours. It's your words, Diane. Recorded on tape. Admissible in court. Emily turned to Margaret. We're done here. Margaret looked at her sister one last time. At the dying woman who'd stolen 20 years. Who'd destroyed her life out of jealousy and greed. Who'd built an empire on ashes and felt no remorse. Goodbye, Diane. I hope the time you have left is everything you've earned. She walked toward the door, didn't look back. Behind her, she heard Diane calling out, heard desperation creeping into that cold voice for the first time. Margaret, Margaret stopped, didn't turn around. Diane's voice was smaller now, almost childlike. I'm sorry. Margaret stood still, let the words hang in the air, then spoke without turning. No, you're not sorry. You're just sorry you got caught. She walked out of Diane's house, out into the Arizona heat, into the rental car where Emily was already uploading the recording to 3 different cloud services, creating backups, making sure nothing could be lost. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, just breathing, processing. Margaret watched the desert landscape blur past and felt something shift inside her chest. Are you okay? Emily's voice was gentle, concerned. Margaret looked at her hands. They'd stopped shaking. I'm free, for the first time in 20 years. Really free. No more questions, no more wondering why. Just the truth. And that's enough. They went straight to the airport, changed their flights, got on a plane leaving that same evening. Margaret didn't want to spend another hour in Arizona, didn't want to breathe the same air as her sister. The flight back felt different, lighter somehow. Margaret watched the desert give way to plains, give way to green Tennessee hills, and felt like she was finally coming home. Not to the house on Oakwood Lane, that belonged to the Chens now, but to something bigger, to a future that was hers to build, to a life that nobody could steal because it was made of truth instead of lies. Emily worked on her laptop the whole flight, filing motions, contacting prosecutors, setting wheels in motion that would lead to Margaret's exoneration, to Diane's arrest, to justice delayed but finally arriving. They landed in Nashville just before midnight. David was waiting at the airport, Sarah beside him despite the late hour and her advanced pregnancy, and Lily, still awake, running toward Margaret the moment she cleared security. You came back. You promised and you came back. Margaret caught the little girl, lifted her up, held her close. I always keep my promises. Lily pulled back just enough to look Margaret in the face. Did you find what you needed? Margaret thought about the recording, about Diane's confession, about 20 years of questions finally answered. Yes, sweetheart, I found exactly what I needed. They drove back to Willowbrook in the dark. Sarah made hot chocolate when they got to the house. They sat around the kitchen table. Margaret, Emily, David, Sarah, Frank, who'd been waiting with them, and Lily, who refused to go to bed until she knew Margaret was safe. Emily played the recording, all of them listening to Diane's voice admitting everything, confessing to crimes that had destroyed Margaret's life, laying out the entire conspiracy in her own words. When it finished, Frank was crying. Sarah was holding David's hand. Lily was watching Margaret with fierce protectiveness. This is enough, Emily's voice was certain. This is more than enough. We file for exoneration tomorrow. With this recording plus Thomas's evidence, plus Jake Morrison's testimony, the Tennessee Attorney General won't have a choice. They'll have to vacate your conviction. How long? Usually these things take years, but we're not going through the usual process. We have a recorded confession from the actual murderer. We have documentary evidence proving a conspiracy. We have witnesses willing to testify. I'm pushing for expedited review. 4 months, maybe less. 4 months after 20 years felt like nothing, like the blink of an eye. And Diane, Emily's smile was sharp. Arizona is already filing charges. Murder, fraud, conspiracy. She'll be arrested within 48 hours. Even if she only lives 6 months, she'll spend them in custody. Justice isn't always perfect, but sometimes it comes through. Margaret looked around the table, at these people who barely knew her but had fought for her anyway, who had opened their home and their hearts and refused to let her face this alone. Family wasn't blood. Family was who stayed when everything fell apart. Family was who fought for you when you couldn't fight for yourself. Family was sitting around a kitchen table at midnight, drinking hot chocolate and planning for a future that was finally within reach. She had lost 20 years, lost Thomas, lost the house she'd grown up in, lost so much that could never be recovered. But sitting there with people who loved her, really loved her, not the performative love Diane had faked for 40 years, Margaret realized something Thomas had tried to tell her before he died. You don't need everything to have enough. You just need the right people. And she had them. Emily filed a petition for exoneration on Monday morning. By Wednesday, the Tennessee Attorney General's office had launched a formal review of Margaret's case. By Friday, the story had broken in national news. Woman freed after 20 years. Sister's deathbed confession reveals elaborate frame-up. Margaret's face was everywhere. The old mugshot from 2006 next to a recent photo Sarah had taken. Every news channel, every website, every newspaper in the country running the story of a woman wrongfully imprisoned while her sister lived off the proceeds of murder. Reporters camped outside the Chen house, called constantly, tried to get interviews with anyone who would talk. David and Sarah shielded Margaret from most of it, but some interviews she agreed to do herself. The journalist from the New York Times was a woman in her 50s who'd covered wrongful conviction cases for 15 years. She sat on the porch of what used to be Margaret's house and asked the question everyone wanted answered. "How do you feel about your sister now?" Margaret chose her words carefully. "I'm not angry anymore. Anger takes too much energy, and I've already given Diane 20 years of my life. I'm not giving her anymore." "Do you forgive her?" "I understand her. I understand why she did what she did, even if I can't justify it. And I've accepted that the sister I loved never really existed. She was a story Diane told to manipulate me, to use me." The journalist leaned forward. "How does that feel? Knowing you were manipulated by someone you trusted so completely? It feels like waking up from a very long dream. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, about myself, none of it was real. That's hard to accept, but it's also liberating in a way." "How so?" "Because I'm not carrying it anymore. The weight of loving someone who didn't love me back. The guilt of wondering what I did wrong. The hope that someday she'd explain and I'd finally understand." Margaret paused, looked out at the oak tree her grandmother had planted a century ago. She explained, "I understand, and now I can let it go." Sarah went into labor on a warm May evening, 2 weeks earlier than expected. David called Margaret at 8:30, his voice shaking. "It's happening. We're heading to the hospital now." Margaret arrived within 20 minutes, found Frank already in the waiting room with Lily. The little girl was bouncing with nervous excitement, unable to sit still for more than 30 seconds at a time. "Is my sister really coming tonight?" "That's what your mom's body is telling her. Sometimes babies have their own schedule." Lily grabbed Margaret's hand. "Will you stay until she's here?" Margaret squeezed back. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart." The hours stretched. Midnight came and went. Lily fell asleep curled against Margaret's side. Frank dozed in his chair. David appeared every hour with updates, contractions closer together, almost time any minute now. At 3:17 in the morning, a nurse came out smiling. "You can come in, all of you." Lily woke instantly, grabbed Margaret's hand and Frank's, pulled them both down the hallway. Sarah looked exhausted but glowing. The baby was wrapped in a pink blanket, impossibly small, perfect. "Come meet your sister." Sarah's voice was soft. "Lily, this is Rose Margaret Patterson." Lily leaned over carefully, touched one tiny fist with her finger. Rose's hand opened, closed around Lily's thumb. "She knows me. She already knows I'm her big sister." Sarah looked at Margaret. "Would you like to hold her?" Margaret's hands trembled as Sarah placed the bundle in her arms. Rose weighed nothing. Had Thomas's nose somehow. Had eyes that would probably turn the same blue as Margaret's mother. Named after the strongest woman I know. Sarah's eyes were wet. "We want Rose to grow up knowing that family isn't just blood. That love is a choice, that her grandma Margaret chose to keep fighting when giving up would have been easier." Margaret couldn't speak, could only hold this baby who carried her name, who represented everything Diane had tried to destroy, but couldn't. Hope, future, the possibility of beginning again. The exoneration hearing was scheduled for mid-July, 4 months after Margaret's return to Tennessee. Emily had pushed for expedited review, and the Attorney General's office had committed to a decision before summer's end. With Diane's confession on tape, with documentary evidence of fraud and forgery, with Jake Morrison's testimony confirming Diane had hired him to kill Victor Blackwood, there was no room for doubt. Margaret Ellis was innocent. She had always been innocent. The hearing took place in the same courtroom where she'd been convicted 20 years earlier. Margaret wore a navy dress Sarah had helped her choose. Emily sat beside her at the defense table. Behind them, David, Sarah holding baby Rose, Lily gripping the bench, Frank with his carpenter's hands folded in prayer. Judge Martha Henderson presided, 62 years old, known for fairness. She'd spent weeks reviewing every piece of evidence Emily had submitted. Her voice carried through the courtroom. Miss Ellis, on behalf of the state of Tennessee, I offer you our deepest apologies. You have been grievously wronged by this system. While no words can give you back the years you've lost, I hope this ruling can offer you some measure of closure. She lifted the gavel. Margaret Rose Ellis, your conviction is hereby vacated. You are exonerated of all charges. This court finds you fully and completely innocent. The sound of wood striking wood echoed like a bell, like a door opening, like chains breaking. Sarah was crying. David stood to applaud. Emily grabbed Margaret's hand and squeezed, but Margaret just sat there feeling something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Whole, not healed, that would take longer. But whole enough to start. Lily vaulted over the barrier, threw her arms around Margaret's waist, buried her face in Margaret's side. You won. Everyone knows the truth now. Yes, sweetheart, everyone knows. The news from Arizona came in mid-August. Diane had been arrested, charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud, perjury. Her husband had filed for divorce the same day. Her assets were frozen. The trial proceeded quickly. Diane's lawyers tried to argue she was too ill to stand trial. The prosecution countered that justice delayed was justice denied. The judge sided with the state. Diane appeared via video link from a hospital bed. Skeletal, barely conscious some days, but present enough to hear the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 40 years in the Arizona State Prison. Everyone knew she'd never serve it. The cancer had spread to her bones, her liver, her lungs. Weeks left, not months. But the conviction would stand. When Diane died, she would die as a convicted murderer. That mattered to Margaret more than she'd expected. 6 days after the trial, Emily called. She's gone, died early this morning. Margaret sat on the porch of her cottage, the small place she'd rented while deciding what came next. She looked out at the garden she'd started, at the roses that were just beginning to bloom. How do I feel? Tired, just very tired. And beneath the exhaustion, something that might have been pity. Diane had spent 70 years chasing things that could never make her happy, had died alone in a hospital room with no one who loved her, no one who would mourn. The civil settlement was finalized in late September. Diane's estate, what remained after divorce proceedings and legal fees, was awarded to Margaret as restitution. $800,000 once all properties sold and accounts liquidated, not the full amount Diane had stolen, but substantial enough to start over. Margaret signed the papers in Emily's office, stared at the number on the check. What are you going to do? Emily's question was gentle, professional curiosity mixed with genuine care. I'm going to buy a house. Something small, something mine. She paused, looked out Emily's window at Willowbrook spreading below. And I'm going to make sure what Diane took from me helps other people. So her crimes create something good instead of just leaving scars. Margaret bought her cottage in October, a small place on the edge of town. 1 bedroom, kitchen barely big enough for 2 people. Living room that fit Thomas's completed table perfectly. The table Frank had brought to the Chen house months ago. The table that now anchored Margaret's new space. She spent $300,000 establishing the Thomas Carter Memorial Scholarship for children of incarcerated parents. $200,000 went to Willowbrook's library to fund literacy programs. Another $100,000 to the Community Center for job training. The final $200,000 she kept for emergencies, for spoiling Lily and Rose, for the future she was building one careful choice at a time. Sarah brought Lily and Rose to see the cottage the week Margaret moved in. Lily ran through every room, declaring each one perfect. Rose, now 5 months old, gurgled contentedly in Sarah's arms. It's so you. Oh. Sarah stood in the living room looking at Thomas's table positioned where it caught the afternoon light. Simple, beautiful, earned. Margaret touched the table's smooth surface, traced the roses Thomas had carved 2 decades ago. This and Frank's friendship are the only things I have left from before. Everything else is new. That's not true. Lily appeared in the doorway. You have your memories, the good ones, the ones Aunt Diane couldn't steal. Margaret knelt down. You're right, sweetheart. The good memories are mine. Thomas, my mother, teaching students who loved books as much as I did. Those are still here. She tapped Lily's forehead gently. And now I have new memories too. You, Rose, your parents, your Frank. all the people who chose to help me. That November, Margaret started volunteering at the Willowbrook Public Library 3 mornings a week, teaching adults to read. Many were former inmates. Others had aged out of school without learning. All of them carried shame about their illiteracy. Margaret understood that shame, understood feeling behind, understood the fear that you'd never catch up. She sat with them patiently, taught phonics, celebrated small victories, never rushed, never judged. One woman, 53, recently released after 15 years, finished reading her first complete book in December, a children's book about a caterpillar becoming the butterfly. She cried when she turned the last page. I never thought I could do this. You did it. That's what matters. Not how long it took, just that you kept trying. The woman wiped her eyes. Why do you help people like me? What do you get out of it? I get to see people discover they're stronger than they thought. That's a gift, not a burden. Margaret didn't mention the 20 years in prison. Didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. Before Margaret could think about buying a house, she needed to do something she'd been putting off. Something that required Diane to be truly gone before she could face it. She needed to visit Thomas. Frank drove her to Willowbrook Cemetery on a cold December morning, the kind of day where your breath made clouds, where the sun tried but couldn't quite warm the air. The headstone was simple. Thomas James Carter, 1960 to 2011, beloved husband, faithful friend. Margaret knelt on the frozen ground, placed her hand on the granite. It was ice cold under her palm. Hello, my love. I'm sorry it took so long. The words came easier now, flowed like water that had found its path. You knew what was coming. You tried to protect me, even though you knew I wouldn't believe you if you told me directly. You left me everything I needed. The journals, the evidence, the safe with Frank. You were protecting me even after you were gone. A wind moved through the bare oak trees, carried the smell of winter, of earth preparing to sleep. I met a family, Thomas, the Chens. They bought our house not knowing it was stolen. And instead of turning away from my mess, they helped me, fought for me, made me part of their lives. Margaret traced his name carved in stone. There's a little girl named Lily, 8 years old, smart as a whip. She finds things people miss. She decided I'm her grandmother and won't hear otherwise. And there's a baby, Rose Margaret, named after me. Can you imagine? Me, a grandmother, not by blood, but by choice. Tears fell, but Margaret didn't wipe them away. The fight is over. Diane confessed. I'm exonerated. She died knowing everyone saw her for what she really was. And I'm free, really free, not just legally, but in my heart. She stayed until the cold became too much, until Frank touched her shoulder gently, until she'd said everything that needed saying. You can rest now. I'm going to be okay. Better than okay. I'm going to live the way you always wanted me to, fully, honestly, without carrying ghosts. I love you. I will always love you. But I'm not stuck anymore. That same December, Lily's third-grade class presented their family history projects. Margaret sat in the back row with other parents and grandparents, watching Lily stand at the front with her poster board. My family is special because we chose each other. Lily's voice was clear, confident. She pointed to photos she'd arranged chronologically. This is Grandma Margaret. She went to jail for 20 years for something she didn't do. Her sister lied and said she was dead. But Grandma Margaret's husband left her clues, like a treasure hunt. And when she got out of jail, she found them and proved she was innocent. The teacher looked nervous. This was heavy for third grade, but Lily kept going. Now Grandma Margaret lives near us. She's teaching me that family is who stays when things get hard, who fights for you, who keeps promises. She came back like she said she would, and she's teaching me it's never too late to start over. Lily held up a drawing, Margaret and Lily holding hands, a house in the background, a rainbow overhead. That's the most important thing I learned. It's never too late to start over. The classroom erupted in applause. The teacher wiped her eyes. Other parents nodded. One man in the back was crying openly. Lily got an A+, but more importantly, she'd articulated something Margaret hadn't quite put into words. Starting over wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something new alongside it. On the 1-year anniversary of her release, Margaret sat on her cottage porch watching the sunset. The garden she'd planted that spring was dormant now, preparing for winter, gathering strength for the bloom that would come. Lily came running up the path, 9 years old now, growing into someone Margaret recognized, confident, curious, kind. Grandma Margaret, Mom says dinner's ready. Tell her I'll be there in 5 minutes. Lily threw herself into the chair beside Margaret's. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever wish things were different? That you didn't have to go to prison? That you got to keep your old house? Margaret considered the question. Let herself feel the full weight of it. I wish I'd been there when Thomas died. I wish I'd had children with him. I wish Diane had been the sister I thought she was. I wish a lot of things. But wishing doesn't change what happened. And if I spend all my time looking backward, I miss what's right in front of me. She gestured toward the cottage, toward the town below. I have this. I have you and Rose. I have work that matters. I have people who love me. If I trade that for bitterness about what I lost, then Diane wins. And I'm done letting her win. Lily leaned against Margaret's shoulder. Mom says you're the bravest person she knows, because you chose to be happy instead of angry. I don't know about brave, but I'm tired of being angry. It's exhausting. I'd rather carry love. They sat watching the sky change colors, pink to orange to purple. The light fading but not gone, just transforming into something different. I'm glad you came back. I'm glad you are my grandma. Margaret wrapped her arm around the little girl. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. Inside, the phone rang. Sarah calling about dinner, reminding Margaret she was expected, that she had a place at the table, that she belonged. Margaret stood, held out her hand to Lily. Come on, let's go home. They walked together down the path as the first stars appeared. Behind them, the cottage sat quiet, Thomas's table visible through the window. A life built on truth instead of lies. A future earned through choosing to keep fighting. Some stories end in tragedy, some end in triumph. Margaret's ended somewhere between. 20 years lost, but a community gained. A sister who destroyed everything but couldn't destroy the capacity to love. Thomas gone, but his protection continuing through the evidence he'd left behind. The house on Oakwood Lane belonged to the Chens now. Belonged to them legally and morally and in every way that mattered. Margaret had made her peace with that. Home wasn't a building. Home was Lily's hand in hers. Sarah's dinner table. Frank's workshop on Saturday mornings. Rose's tiny fingers. The library where she taught. The cottage where she slept. Home was choosing to live instead of just survive. Choosing love over bitterness. Choosing to believe that people could be good even after you'd been shown how cruel they could be. Margaret Ellis had spent 20 years paying for a crime she didn't commit. But she'd walked out the other side with something Diane never had and never would. People who loved her for who she actually was. Not what she could give them. Not what they could take from her. Just her. That was worth more than any house. More than any amount of money. More than revenge or vindication or anything else the world could offer. It wasn't everything she'd lost, but it was everything she needed, and that was enough.